Hello and welcome to the Muncie Video Adult Sunday School Study for the rest of May 2021. We're going to study highlights of the Psalms. I'm John Wakefield. A current biblical scholar, N.T. Wright, says the Psalms are the heart of the Bible. Well, he's got me beat as a biblical scholar by quantum leaps, but I'm not sure that N.T. Wright is right on this one. I'd like to think that the Gospel of John is the heart of the Bible, and maybe for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, John 3:16, is the heart of the Bible. But this great book, the Psalms, is the greatest single biblical book for daily Christian living. And I'd like to think that you found that to be so too. And by the way, speaking of what you've found, whether or not you've found the Psalms to be great for your daily living, I want to ask you to commit right now to reading some of the Psalms each week of this month. You'll be exceedingly glad you did. Start at the beginning and read 20 to 30 Psalms each week in May. Or start by reading a few, beginning with Psalm 1, then read a few beginning with Psalm 42, then read a few beginning with Psalm 73, then read a few beginning with Psalm 90, and finally read a few beginning with Psalm 107. Why those beginning points? Well, they're one way to group the Psalms into sections. You got it? 1, 42, 73, 90, and 107. Today I want to give you a glimpse of how incredibly wonderful the Psalms are. And I want to whet your appetite to look deeper with me in the Psalms the rest of this month. This book is quoted more than any other Old Testament book. Many would say that the Psalms contain confirmation of Jesus' identity as the Son of God and the Anointed One, the beginning of the kingdom that the Psalms talk about. I like seeing some of the picture of Jesus before Jesus ever came to earth. I like looking back to the time of the Psalms and realizing that the Israelites had a picture of the coming Messiah. Bernard Anderson was a biblical scholar of an earlier era. He wrote an exceptional little book titled The Unfolding Drama of the Bible. In that book, he said that the Old Testament was as if someone was standing over your shoulder, whispering into your ear, "He is coming, he is coming." And the New Testament is as if that person were standing over your shoulder, whispering, "He is here, he is here." Well, the Psalms are often standing over our shoulders, whispering, "He is coming. He is coming." But they're also a great source of help for our daily living. I think they're the greatest source anywhere. In the 4th century, St. John Chrysostom said the Psalms were words for every moment, our inspiration for every hymn, the key for every liturgy, and the central elements in every prayer. In his day, ordinary people committed the Psalms to memory. They heard the Psalms at communion. Their Benedictine monks recited the entire book of Psalms every week for 1,300 years. Martin Luther said that the Psalms were a little Bible. Athanasius of Alexandria said each psalm, quote, "holds up a mirror to the human heart," close quote. And John Calvin said the Psalms were, quote, "an anatomy of all parts of the soul," close quote. All of these people thought these Psalms were essential for their lives. The Psalms turn up in some pretty amazing places today. When he was with the band U2, Bono wrote songs that said the Psalms spoke to the tragedies, the inequities, and the anxieties of his generation. And by the way, Bono often turns up at First United Methodist Church of Hollywood, California on Sundays. REM quoted the Psalms in their album titled Everybody Hurts. Even the group Megadeth quoted the 23rd Psalm in one of their albums. So let's dig into this exceptional book. Here's one of the most striking pieces of writing for our lives. Now look past the fact that it was written in a patriarchal culture. Look past whatever view you may have of the method of creation. It's not a book of proofs. It's a book of spirit. Consider the spirit of this passage that I'm about to quote, the spirit of its worship, and our own incredibly special nature before God. Are you ready for this psalm? No, you're not, and neither am I. But God and God's messenger has shared it with us, and it is full of awesome worship of God and the most encouraging word of hope for us. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man that you care for him? You made him a little lower than the angels and crowned him with honor and with glory. You made him ruler over the works of your hands. You put everything under his feet, all sheep and oxen and the beasts of the field, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. That's from the 8th Psalm. Isn't that just about one of the most beautiful and moving passages you've ever heard? It's just one of the beautiful passages we'll deal with later this month. But also consider some parts of the Psalms that we might find thorny. Here's an example. It's in Psalm 44 and 47. You are my King and my God, who decrees victories for Jacob. Through you we push back our enemies. Through your name we trample our foes. For God is the King of all the earth. Sing to him a psalm of praise, for the kings of the earth belong to God. He is greatly exalted. How are you, you independence-loving, anti-royal people of America? How are you with the concept of God as king? Do you really want to return to being ruled over by someone like Elizabeth II and her prime minister, or her son Charles? It does bring up a major concept in the Psalms, a concept that we'll need to deal with later in this month: God as a king. Or how about this concept in the Psalms? It's in Psalm 149, verses 6 to 9, and it's in others as well. Here it is. May the praise of God be in their mouths and a double-edged sword in their hands, to inflict vengeance on the nations and punishment on the people, to bind their kinds with fetters, their nobles with shackles of iron, to carry out the sentence written against them. This is the glory of all his saints. Go get them, God. Get even with those bad guys. We think we're people of grace to the world. Where's the grace in that? We'll need to talk about that in the next few weeks as well. And then, even with the thorny passages, there's the question of its role in our personal lives. What is that role? We'll need to talk about that as well. So here's the drudgery part. 1, you and I need to make the Psalms an essential part of our Christian lives. But 2, We'll do a whole lot better making them that part of our lives if we know what a psalm is, what its style is, what were the times of the psalms, what their main characteristics are, who wrote them, and how their lives were like our lives. So, we'd better get started. What is a psalm? It is a religious poem or song, usually praising God, calling on God for help, conveying a message of judgment or hope, or pleading with God on behalf of the people. So Psalm 1 says, "Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish." There it is, beautiful poetry, praise of God, a message of judgment and hope. In the Hebrew and in the Greek, the word psalm means a song played with musical accompaniment. Literally, it means to play a stringed instrument with the fingers. What difference does the definition of a psalm make to us today? Well, I'll tell you. You and I need plenty of beauty these days. It's a fairly ugly world out there. You and I need hope these days. Where can we get it? From these songs. It's a fairly horizontal, self-centered world out there. You and I need the vertical exercise of praising God these days. Praising God, telling God how great God is. These things refresh us and give us a whole different, encouraging look on our world. What difference does the definition of a psalm make to us today? It's everything we need for survival. Here's an idea of why it's important to know the style of the Psalms. One axiom of the Hebrews. The axiom: if it's worth saying once, it's worth saying twice. Repetition. And when they do that, you and I had better pay attention, because it's for our survival as well. Robert Frost used exact repetition, and we paid attention. He wrote, "The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." It's a call back to the responsibilities of life. It's repetition, and we pay attention to it. But the Hebrews wrote the same thought with two different sets of words, and that draws our attention to the thought. Psalm 59, verse 1 says, "Deliver me from my enemies, O God. Protect me from those who rise up against me. Deliver me from evildoers, and save me from bloodthirsty people." In that case, you and I learn that we can take our worst moments to God for hope and relief. In fact, the writer took 4 lines to say the same thing, and not just 2. Must be really important. Or here's another thought about the nitty-gritty of the Psalms. Who wrote the Psalms? Well, the bottom line answer is we're not sure. We're pretty sure that David wrote quite a few of them. We think maybe his scribes wrote some of them, maybe after he dictated them. We think maybe some other people wrote some too. Now let's take a psalm that we're pretty sure David wrote. And what difference does it make that David wrote it? Here's the psalm, Psalm 56. "Be merciful to me, O God. When I am afraid, I will trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In the Lord, whose word I praise. In God I trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? I am under vows to you, O God. I will present my thank offerings to you, for you have delivered me from death, and my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. Or take this passage from the next psalm, Psalm 57. I will praise you, O Lord, among the nations. I will sing of you among the peoples. For great is your love, reaching to the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the skies. Now, what difference does it make that the author of those Psalms was David? Well, I'll tell you. Here is a man who lusted after another man's wife. He secretly watched her bathe. He had intercourse with her. He fathered a child with her. Her husband was a military hero who had sense enough to not go home to his wife when David tried to trick him into doing it. David put him in the front lines of battle so he would be killed and David could marry the man's wife. Here was a first-rate scoundrel. He was a lousy father. One of his own sons tried to overthrow him. His mistakes and sins cost Israel 70,000 deaths in battle. And yet God called him a man after his own heart. And that same scoundrel could sing to God, great is your love, reaching to the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the skies. For you have delivered me from death, and my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. I'll tell you what difference it makes for us that the author of those Psalms is David. If David can be assured of the incomparable love and mercy of God, so can you and I. If David's the author, you and I can always have hope. Always. We'll talk about the style of the Psalms, the figures of speech of the Psalms, the authors of the Psalms, and the times of the Israelite people. One last example to whet your appetite for the Psalms. Let's take the Psalms and metaphor. One writer describes metaphor as, quote, a figure of speech in which one thing is said to be another, which obviously it is not, close quote. A fairly dry and technical idea, but when we put some skin on those dry bones, the metaphor comes out like this, from a psalm that you know well. I quote it from good old King James English. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. Now, if David had written, God takes good care of me, I don't need anything. He puts me in peaceful places. He brings me back to peace when I've gone out of control. If he'd written the song like that, you'd have said, well, that's dry. And you wouldn't have found the great peace in your soul that you do when you read the words, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. What a beautiful metaphor. The shepherd tends every sheep in his flock. Not one is forgotten. The shepherd provides refreshment for his flock. The shepherd provides nourishment for his flock, and he takes the flock there. The shepherd knows how to bring his flock to a peaceful setting, and we, the sheep, follow him, and we say, ah. What's the metaphor? We are the sheep of God's pasture. and God is the shepherd. And no amount of straight, dry language can describe our relationship with God better than that. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's no wonder that people find peace in those words at a funeral. Metaphor gives meaning and impact to the Psalms. We'll look at metaphor and other figures of speech, at the style of the period and the style of the Psalms in the next few weeks. And we'll find how much the Psalms mean to us. Thanks for listening. Start reading the Psalms.